Good evening. It's wonderful to be with you again. My name is Cisco Walker. I'm an evangelist in the International District of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have Pastor Alonzo today. He's going to be joining me for an interesting discussion. You remember that last week we talked about how marijuana or cannabis or pot is here to stay. And because it's here to stay, then what are we supposed to do now? How do we move forward? How do we navigate the landscape that is set before us? Because there's no going back. We can't change it. And so tonight we're going to talk about something that's somewhat controversial, maybe with some, but we're going to attempt to answer the question the best that we can is, can a Christian smoke pot? Can a Christian smoke cannabis? Can a Christian smoke marijuana? And as we jump into the discussion today, I want to read you Romans 14, verses 1 through 4. And if you're looking for the answer to can a Christian smoke pot, I would encourage you to thoughtfully and prayerfully read Romans 14 and do your best to try to understand what exactly Paul is saying in his epistle. But Romans 14 and 1 says this. It says, "Receive one who is weak in the faith, but do not dispute over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand." So we're talking about the law of liberty as it concerns can a Christian smoke pot? You know, last week we talked about Pastor Alonzo. We talked about the polarizations from reefer madness to recreational legalization, and you know, reefer madness is almost 100 years old. But it's strange how, it's strange how just in 100 years. And reefer madness, if you watch reefer madness, you know, it villainizes and it demonizes and it almost makes cannabis smoking seem satanic. But it's strange how we've come in just 100 years from that all the way to the door just being wide open, right? Mm-hmm. You remember the film. What did you think about it?
You know, it's one of those things that's designed to evoke a certain kind of emotion from a person. And I'd liken it, you know, some of our previous conversations we've talked about, you know, hellfire and brimstone and its effectiveness on helping people come to saving faith in Christ. And I think, you know, films like Reefer Madness and other things that, you know, surrounded that type of propaganda film, I think it achieves its goal, right? It wants to terrify people into behaving a certain way. And I think that if we're honest Christians, we're going to look at that and say that there's an element of witchcraft. Like, I want you to do this, so I'm going to put before you this potion, this concoction, this spell, and I'm going to get you to see things my way. Because, you know, everyone has freedom as long as they are free to believe that I'm right.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, you know, it was a church that funded major, you know, the churches were made that film. You know, they put forth the financial backing to propagate that message and to put it out there. And so, you know, we've come from like one extreme kind of, I see it in some ways, we've gone from one extreme all the way to the other extreme. And so the world that we live in is changing, you know, very much.
It is.
And we talked about facts about legalization here in the state of New Mexico. We talked about if marijuana was a gateway drug right? We had an interesting conversation with Rocky. I think you watched some of that.
I did. It was great.
And he kind of felt that it wasn't, but I don't know if it's that easy to nail down if it's a gateway drug or not, because I think there's so many things involved, like genetics, accessibility, environment, like all of those things play a factor as far as, will marijuana be a gateway drug? I don't know. For me, I started with alcohol, from alcohol to pot, from pot to cocaine. So I'm not a very good example of,
Sure.
For me, I don't know if it was that simple though, if it was just a gateway drug for me. Was it a gateway drug for you, or do you see it that way?
I don't see it that way.
Uh-huh.
And I don't see it that way because I think it's rooted in escapism. And I think the way that I look at the world through a theological lens, I think that in large part, a lot of our theology is based on escapism. Like, the whole Left Behind series, that playing on, what we see in the passage that, one will be taken and another will be left. It's this escapism that I'm going to get to go, and you, because you're wrong, you're going to have to stay. And so I think Christianity does, in many senses, many people practicing Christianity are after the escapism element of it. And so it doesn't really matter what it is that you pursue. Escapism is escapism. So whether it's alcohol, whether it's crack, whether it's cocaine, whether it's marijuana, whether it's, King James only, whatever it is, escapism is still escapism.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
I think that's very accurate.
In my own experience, I dabbled with alcohol, didn't really like it, and all of the drugs that I ended up doing over the course of my life, they were all drugs that I went looking for, not because it was necessarily a gateway, but because I was like, I'd like to try this, I'd like to try that. I exercised a whole lot of autonomy and free moral agency to pursue the things that I pursued.
We talked about on the job smoking, like that I'm doing a lot of construction work now, and so we've seen a great rise in the construction industry where guys are are getting stoned like every 2 hours, and there's a lot of gray areas there, and it's difficult to kind of come to an objective opinion as to whether what is the difference between having like 3 lunch beers and getting really stoned at lunch. There's a big gray area there, and I have seen it. I've seen some that can handle it. I've seen some that it's become very problematic because, every couple of hours people are slipping away to get stoned, and they come back, mistakes are being made. Yep. And so the challenge is how are we supposed to hold people, how are we supposed to hold them accountable? I talked about a guy that I was working with. He was an unhoused guy trying to better his life, and one of the supervisors, he was a very austere man. When I told, and the guy slipped away, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go out and get stoned." And I said, "Well," I said, "if that guy catches you, he's going to send you home." And he was like, "No, he's not. It's legal now. He can't do that." So there's a great big hole there that needs some kind of parameters, some kind of fencing, if you will, around it, because there's that gray area, and nobody really knows how to solve that area. It's kind of become an elephant in the room. It's something that people don't really want to talk about. Stoner guy's all for it because he can go out and get stoned, but from an employer's perspective, it can be problematic. We kind of touched on that. What do you think about some of that?
So a lot of it comes down to insurability, right?
Uh-huh.
We live in a litigious society. We live in a society that people file a lot of court cases. And so a company's liability for an injury or for an industrial accident, for a failure to complete a task, employers, construction companies purchase insurance to protect the business. And if
Yeah.
there are individuals who, because of the insurability, aren't operating in a safe and efficient manner, it really impacts a company's liability. And
Yes.
so, like, if someone is under the influence of whatever they're under the influence of, like in some cases, and it's a parallel that I draw all the time, but people get high on rage, right? Like there are road rage incidences, violence in the workplace that may not have anything to do with a chemical substance, but a person who is operating in an unchecked mental state, whether because they're angry, because they're high, because they're drunk, whatever it is, it impacts that company's liability and their responsibility if something bad happens.
Yeah, and we were working with this unhoused man, and we were cutting wires out of the ceiling grid, the white and the blue, and the guy went out to get high. He came back in. And he cut the orange wires, he cut the black wires, he cut the purple wires, and so he shut off the alarm system. We couldn't turn off the heater, and it was like 90 something degrees in that ceiling grid for 3 days, and they had to bring in another company, and they had to put it all back together again, and it took them hours and hours and hours. And it's debatable, like maybe that mistake wouldn't have taken place had stoner guy not went out and got high on the job. So like, but it could have been alcohol, it could have been a bunch of other things,
whatever
but
it is.
if that was alcohol and the guy was drunk and he got caught, then they would just send him home. He would probably be blacklisted from the labor company. But because it is that gray area, it's kind of more difficult to kind of pinpoint and do anything about it.
It's not that gray. Like from an employer standpoint, as a person who has spent a significant amount of time in management, there is not a gray area. So the gray area is detectability. That's the only gray area.
Yeah.
Is detectability, because you can test for alcohol, and alcohol has a decay window, right? That within 72 hours, ethylene glycol (ETG). A person who is under the influence of alcohol is going to emit ethylene glycol, which is a byproduct of producing, of processing alcohol in their body for 3 days. So you can tell at what level a person's ethylene glycol level is, right? And so a person who is continually drinking is going to have a continually high level of ethylene glycol.
You can kind of pinpoint when they drank last.
Correct, because you know the decay rate. Now, with some of the cannabis that's there, I mean, the decay rate's like 90 days. Like, other weed, you'd be free of positive tests within like 4 weeks. Some of the stuff that's out there now, the THC is so high, that window of detectability, the decay window, is like 90 days.
Yeah.
It's not 28 days. It's hugely different. So the gray area becomes detectability. An oral swab can detect cannabis if you just smoked it. An oral swab can detect alcohol if you just drank it. But the lasting effects of alcohol, you're going to smell like it longer.
Yeah, you smell
Breath mints
formaldehyde.
are less effective. But it doesn't. It's really not a gray area. The only gray area is finding that window of detectability. Because if a person is driving a vehicle, they're suspected of being under the influence. You test them for cannabis, they're going to test positive for cannabis for weeks.
Yeah, but the challenge is pinpointing when was the last time.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, how would they do that? Through blood? How can you track it back to a window of time of impairment that may cause an accident?
That's the hard part.
Blood,
you need a warrant.
Yeah, very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, if you want my blood, you're gonna.
Nobody's gonna. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's a crazy setup that you have employers that are navigating liability. You have employees that are trying to make work be less terrible. And some jobs that are out there, like I understand, like I probably would too if I had to do some of the things I see people do. but it
Yeah.
doesn't give any sort of permission to do it, and it doesn't excuse the abuse of that substance while on the job. And I know lots of people in my life. There have been periods of time where I have gone to work high, where I have gone to work drunk. Like those are things that happen. They're things that people do. When you're doing it, you don't think it's as terrible as it really is. You find ways to excuse and to justify and to explain away why it's not what it really is. But at the end of the day, like, and I had to come to that point of maturity. I think everyone that comes to that point, and sometimes people come to that point more than once, right?
Yeah,
of like,
sure.
I got to reconcile this. Is this what I want to do with my life? And I think that's the challenge that Christians have with the topic of cannabis.
All right, so why do so many evangelicals see the consumption of cannabis as a sin? That's kind of my first big question I wanted to try to work out.
So the Bible says a lot of different things, right? The Bible talks about sobriety. The Bible talks about not being under the influence, pharmakia. The passage about being sober-minded is not necessarily don't be drunk or under the influence. That's out of 1 Peter.
Yeah.
It's really about be aware of your surroundings. And so the largest part of Christianity is self-control through faith in Christ.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
And so 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, a common one that people come across, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything.
Yeah.
The way that I look at a lot of these theological concepts is that I believe in the trichotomy of man, that man has three parts. He has a spirit, he has a soul, and he has a body. And the spirit is the real you. It's the thing that's created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And as a Pentecostal denomination, that's where we get much of our teaching and our stance on holiness. Your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. It's what you feel and what you think you need and what you have to have. And your body is always going to be dominated by either your spirit or your soul. It's going to follow the leading of whichever is the stronger. So I think evangelicals look at cannabis consumption as a sin for a couple different reasons. And one of them is they don't want people smoking pot.
Right.
Any more than they want people having an abortion, any more than they want people cheating on their taxes, getting the green handshakes, not reporting them. Like the outward appearance of Christianity is that you should be self-controlled.
Right.
And
right.
so a person is going to look at a substance like cannabis or alcohol or tobacco, something that makes you do something every few hours is something that controls you. Addiction, I've heard people phrase it in this way over many years, that when you're not using, you're thinking about using. And so the idea that your perspective gets taken off of God is the challenge. Now, what the Bible says about it and what evangelicals believe about it, I think are necessarily not the same thing.
Yeah. I would agree with that, because if you put can a Christian smoke cannabis into the Romans 14 category, you come up with the scenario where it's like, if you have faith, have it to yourself. If you have faith, if you do these things and it causes your brother to stumble, if it causes a big problem with other evangelical people, then you trust God, you have faith, then do it, but don't cause division.
Don't cause division.
It, right? And I
100%.
think that a lot of evangelicals, like, they really struggle with that type of thinking, because
Well, they want power and control.
Yeah, and they want just complete like abstinence, And I think in order to answer the question, we have to acknowledge and we have to attempt to understand just exactly what kind of cannabis is being consumed and for like what purpose it's being consumed, because it isn't. I think too many evangelicals are stuck in reefer madness. Most of them have not even seen reefer madness, but they're stuck in just say no. They're stuck in the Ronnie Reagan type of anti-drug propaganda that they have been spoon-fed and that they have quite thoroughly enjoyed, because it allows them to judge and point fingers at those who are suffering and who are trying to alleviate their suffering. So like they're not even aware, like even me, the last, I've been fooling around with pot and cannabis and all this kind of stuff for about 3 weeks now, and like it's a whole new science. There's so much material, and I just wonder, like, what kind are you taking? Why are you taking it? Have individuals, if they are regenerated, if they are born again, have individuals truly sought out the best match for their affliction, whatever it might be, with the help of a physician? And if so, is cannabis use valid and helpful? So there's so many things that goes into it, I think, and I wonder how many people have really thought it through.
I don't think they have. You look at the Bible and cars aren't found there, right? X-rays are not found there. Surgery is not listed.
Yeah.
Like the technology, like people would, put maggots on wounds and like.
Oh yeah, like leeches and stuff. Yeah.
So like, the history of not just pharmacopoeia, right? Like the drugs and supplements, but the history of medicine and the availability of transportation and even just the literacy of being able to read. Like these are things that are not contained in the Bible as some sort of universal right for all. And so we make plenty of use of cars because they make life more convenient. We make plenty use of communication mediums because they make life convenient. We enjoy satellite telephones and cell phones and wireless, cordless, all kinds of different technological things that are not in the Bible.
Right.
But you could certainly boil down that some of the, and I'm quote unquote, I'm not giving any sort of permission, but there is an element that it is more natural for some of the things that we're talking about here than there are for the things that we insist are true. Like, should you have a Gulfstream 7? They're not listed here, right? But yet ministers and ministries are able to travel around the world because they have these Gulfstream jets, right?
Yeah,
they have Lear jets, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, right? So we can make whatever we want out of it, but at some point in time, we're reading things into and out of the text that the Bible is absolutely silent on.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really didn't discuss the last time, as it concerns smoking pot or smoking cannabis, is the lung damage that happens. It is bad for your lungs. It's bad for your respiratory system.
Yeah.
Smoking pot damages the human lungs. Regular use leads to chronic bronchitis. It can cause immune compromised person to be more susceptible to lung infections. The stoner guy that cut all the wires out of the ceiling grid, like he confessed to me working, I would work and talk with him and stuff, and he had his own kind of strange theology and spirituality that he'd kind of made up and stuff. But even he says, I've got to quit doing this. He says, I've got to quit smoking pot. Yeah. He says, it helps me. I'm able to escape. He's like, but it's bad for my lungs. He's all, it's killing me. Like I can't breathe. He's all, I can't do kind of the things that I want to do. And he said, I need to, I need to give it up. And to his credit, like, I thought that was very admirable for him to be honest and, tell the truth about it, because that's one thing that I've seen with secular people who smoke pot like constantly. They tend to ignore the fact that like it does do severe damage to your lungs, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, look at Willie, right? Willie doesn't smoke it anymore because Willie just eats the gummies because like he can't sing, like he can't breathe right, and all the years of smoking pot, they've damaged his lungs. They threaten his career as a singer. However much time is left of it, only God knows. But that is a reality. When you smoke it, you are damaging your lungs. And I've smoked for years, and I know that you've smoked for several years. And why is it that secular people and evangelicals who do use it, why is that such a convenient thing for people just to kind of dismiss the lung damage?
Because we want to self-justify.
Okay.
That's the number one reason. Like, I don't know when the last time you were in like Mexico City. I've never been to China. I've never been to India. Never been to Pakistan. But there are some of the most polluted cities in the world. Mexico City, the refineries in India and in Pakistan where they smelt copper and metal. Like, these salt and pepper shakers here are made in China. This thing here made in China. Our lust for cheap goods creates the same kind of breathing problem in third world countries. But we justify it because we're like, oh, well, I can buy a plate that says thankful and blessed, right? And it has, whatever is made in China, right? And so, like, thankful and blessed, the person making this doesn't speak English, right? But I'm like, ooh, I got it for $1, right?
Right.
And never mind the environmental cost.
It has a Christian
it's
thing
great.
on it.
So it's totally self-justifying. And so it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, it's not giving tacit permission that, like, oh, well, you can smoke pot as long as you acknowledge that it hurts your lungs. It hurts your lungs. But so does this hurt someone else's lungs, right? And, like, you're making someone else eat meat sacrificed to an idol, and maybe they want vegetables.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see. Let's look at this one. It says, I have this. It says, just because it's legal now for individuals to consume cannabis, does this mean that it's acceptable for evangelicals to smoke cannabis?
So I think it comes down to conformity with the world, right? And so earlier in 1 Corinthians 6, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but I will not be dominated by anything. Paul repeats that in 1 Corinthians 10:23. He says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. And so at some point in time, the question has to be asked, well, does it build up? Does it build what up? Do you build yourself up in your most holy faith? Some people take medication for migraines. Is there faith in the medication for migraines? It's not your business.
Right.
Is some people have anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and they take medication for it, and they're Christians. Is there faith in that medication or not? Do those things help build them up? Maybe they do. Does cannabis help build someone up? I don't know. It doesn't help me. I can't speak to what it does for someone else.
Well, and just because it's legal now for people to consume it, it's legal to go to the strip club, right? But it's not the best decision I, as a Christian, can make.
Abstain
right?
from every form of evil.
It's perfectly legal for me to spend a majority of my day and evening looking at pornography on the internet. But once again, it's not the best decision that I, Joe Christian, as a born-again believer, can make, right? I mean, it's legal for me to go to the Downs or to go to Santa Ana or to go to the casino and gamble. But as an ambassador of Christ, it's not the best decision that I can make because, like you said, is it edifying? Is it building, right? Are you giving off a positive reflection of Christ? Because the people that do have bipolar and they take psychotropic medication, they love Christ, but they need that medicine so they don't experience the peaks and the troughs that can spiral them completely out of control, because God does work through psychotropic medications. So if God can work through psychotropic medications, then he can work through cannabis use. But I think it depends on what kind, how much, what are the reasons. Have you discussed it with a doctor? And I think it depends on, do you have a history with addiction to begin with?
Absolutely.
Because you said that it can work for others, but it doesn't work for you. Is that because of your background?
Yes.
Okay.
Because when I got out of jail, I had converted to Christ in jail, and I was a methamphetamine addict for a long time, sticking needles in my arm. was my favorite thing to do. I didn't like smoking it. I didn't like, snorting it. I liked putting it in my veins. And, my dad, not necessarily speaking accurately as to what my proclivity was and my habit, but he said, well, before you went to jail, you were shoving all that dope in your nose, and now you're just shoving Jesus down people's throats. And that was a little bit hard to hear, right? And a little hard to take. But it did prompt me to do some self-examination, because I think a lot of times when people convert to whatever they're a believer in, cannabis or whatever, that's the only thing that they talk about, right? They talk about it with a different kind of passion. They talk about it, they glorify it, they do, a whole bunch of different things to put it on a pedestal, or to make it so that it's justifiable, reasonable, like it's the correct thing to do, and often without really taking into account someone else's perspective on it. So kind of going back to that, passage in Romans, it may cause someone else to stumble, but even good things can be taken to a bad, addictive level. And so in my own life, that is something that I have to watch. Like, if it were up to me, I would be at the church all the time, or I would be doing this or doing that all the time, because doing is the thing that I like to do. I don't like to sit. I don't like to watch TV. I don't like to sit at all. I don't want to sit. And so, I can't let that dominate my life.
Yeah, sure.
Because I will.
Yeah.
And so, when you're married and when you have a family, that's not a healthy thing for a relationship. And people say, well, you got to occupy until Jesus comes. Well, occupying means sitting down too, right? And it's an addictive trait for me to do things to an extreme.
Right. So when you're into something, you're all the way in. It isn't just like, well, I'm just gonna, I grew up with people like that. There was this kid and he played drums for us and stuff in our little heavy metal vomit bands and stuff. And I remember he played pool, and when he played pool, that's all that he did. He became very good at playing pool, but once he dove into something, he went all the way into it.
Yep.
And so that's interesting, to bring that out, to bring that up, and and a lot of people, people that smoke it, they hang around other people that smoke it. Mm-hmm. People that don't smoke it, they hang around other people who don't smoke. I had a guy today, right? We're at the job site, and I said, I smell mota, and he just laughed. He was a Navajo guy, a little about my age. And then he looks at me and he goes, "Why, do you have some?" He goes, "You have some? Let's smoke it. Let's smoke it." And I was like, "No, I don't. I don't have any." I was like, I don't do that anymore. And he was like, "Oh well." But that's kind of where that's the shift now. I took my two little boys, I'm praying, I'm trying to, as they say, eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners, right? That's part of the Christian experience.
Yep.
That's part of true Christianity, because you're either going to exhibit hospitality towards tax collectors and sinners, or you're going to be like the Pharisees and you're going to say, why does your teacher sit down and eat with people like this? Why does your teacher hang around? Don't you know what kind of people? So it's a challenge, and it can be kind of a dangerous area. It's kind of a dangerous intersection to stand in between, to eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners, or to hang around with people who aren't into Jesus. They're not into the church. They don't, but still, we're still called to show hospitality. We're still called to be friendly, right? We're still called to put ourselves in positions to where, maybe the conversation could come up. And I've learned through years, hopefully of maturity, hopefully nothing of my own, but all but by the grace of God, I've learned that if those times don't come up, it's still all right, because they're hopefully, prayerfully seeing God's love in action through me, without having to have John 3:16, without having to have all kinds of theology. Just simply showing kindness and love can go really, really far with people who may not even be interested in Jesus, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's true. A thing that you bring up in that, if you show me who your friends are, I'll tell you who you are. Is an old saying.
It's like a proverb.
Yeah. It's a proverb, and it's found in more than one language. Like it's something that I heard growing up. And,
it's universal.
It's universal, and sometimes we're the wrong friend.
Yeah,
right?
But we always think it's somebody else.
We always think it's somebody else. We want it to be someone else because it's escapism. And your argument about behavior and the statement that you've probably heard that you are the only Bible that someone may ever read.
I say, I hope not. Yeah. That's always bothered me to some degree, because it's like, gee, if that's true, like, because I know myself, and I don't know myself as well as I think I do, but I know, like, that there are still areas in my life. I try to see myself as the perpetrator, not a perpetrator, but I try to see myself as Saul, as you say, Haman. And so, like, when people say, you may be the only Bible that somebody ever reads, and I always think about that, and I think about, wow, that's a lot of pressure. How in the world can I live up to that? And I hope I'm not the only Bible that people would ever read.
See, I see that so radically differently. Like, nobody ever complains about a hypocrite addict, right? No one ever, goes up to someone who says they like to smoke pot but only smokes a little bit and says, "You hypocrite!
Midnight toker.
Why don't you smoke more?" Right? Nobody ever goes to the bar, right, with someone who, has like 1 or 2 or 3 drinks and the other person has 12, and they're like, "You hypocrite, I thought you were a drinker." But, like, you get around a Christian, and if a Christian isn't living up to some sort of weird biblical standard that someone else created, then you call them a hypocrite, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so, like, that's one of the dumbest things in the world that I've encountered. And the truth, I think, the truth is always somewhere in between the extremes, right? And I think Paul's argument in Athens at the Areopagus exemplifies what it means for there to be a person who is the only Bible that you will ever read. And I don't think we should be afraid of that ever. And so in Acts 17, picking it up in verse 22, picking up a few verses before, he's out in the marketplace in the synagogue, and all he's doing is talking about Jesus. There's no megaphone, there's no speaker, he's not standing on a box, he's not calling everybody a sinner. And like,
he stood where Socrates stood.
Well, he got there.
Yeah.
But this isn't where he started.
No,
right?
He started in the marketplace.
In the marketplace,
reasoning with those.
And so much of our Christian theology is informed by Hellenistic beliefs, by Greek philosophy.
Yeah, sure.
And we're like, no, it's not, but it is.
Most of our conceptions of hell are.
It is.
Yeah.
100%.
Hades,
it is.
Yeah.
The series that I started this past Sunday, where we're looking at, the value of women in the church. It is our Greek mindset that wants to silence women. That's not a Christian perspective. Or it's our Jewish mindset that wants to silence women. It's not Christian mindset. That is not what Christ preached. Christ was the friend of woman.
And
Christ was the advocate
and
for
some
woman.
of it's pop culture. Some of it's like Archie and Enid.
But isn't that what we've now turned Hellenistic philosophy into?
But that stuff was like way out of control, and so
it was in that day.
Yeah, and it was out of control in pop culture too.
Still is.
Yeah,
still
it
is. So in this passage, Paul says, look, like, I get it. You're trying to find spirituality, right? Like, people who seek God and get high, they call that augmented spirituality.
All right.
Right?
Okay. That's
augmented spirituality. And Paul says, look, I get it. You're just trying to find God. But can I lay something on you? It's not that hard. Like, it's actually easier than you think. In fact, all of these temples that you have here in your city, they're dedicated to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. His name is Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's literally nothing weird complicated, difficult, challenging, any of those things in the argument that Paul is outlining. And it's the argument that I think a person makes when they say, you are the only Bible that someone will ever read. And for me, that's because failure is normative. And I totally understand that I screw up all the time. Like, I'm a baseball fan. If a batter has a 300 batting average, that means out of 10 times that they go to the plate, 3 of them, they end up on the plate. If you had that kind of job track record at work, you would be fired. But these guys, these professional athletes, right, they can hit 50% of their free throws and they are incredible.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
They're like, it's like, wow, 85%. It's like, what an excellent shooter. They're hitting 30% from the floor, right? They hit 3 out of their 10 shots and they're like, it's a really good shooter. Defense is really, coming out, working handily. So it's the same excuse that we make, right? That we justify failure. We just have somehow conditioned ourselves that Christians can't fail. And I think that's why.
And isn't that a misunderstanding of grace to begin with?
100%.
We are like the one that says, "I knew you to be a hard and an austere man.
We're dumb.
So I took the talent that you gave me and I hit it in the ground."
And nowhere in that passage.
Yeah, because
nowhere does it say
that man had the wrong conception of God.
Yep.
He doesn't see himself as a son. He sees himself as a slave. He
Boom.
sees God as a tyrant. He doesn't
Boom.
see God as a loving father.
That's right.
Right? But I wanted to say this too. In order for Paul to be successful at Mars Hill, he had to have the unction and the leading and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. But he had to understand the culture. He understood the poets of the time, and he understood the philosophers of the time, right?
Yep.
Because when he would say those things that he said, is even some of your own poets have said, that struck a chord with people. Mm-hmm. And I think that far too many times, and even this debate on can a Christian smoke marijuana, there are too many evangelicals that because of superstition, because of things like Reefer Bandits, because of things like Ronnie Reagan, because of things like Just Say No, because of a lack of trying to educate themselves and learn a little bit about cannabis, they just completely throw it all down. They throw it all down the drain. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you can't do that. And Romans 14 shows us that you can't do that.
That is correct.
Because, but you're staunch, hardcore, Captain Kangaroo evangelical person, he will say no. Romans 14 is talking about meat and vegetables. It's not talking about pot. It's not talking about this. And no, there are several applications that one can draw from those things, because the real emphasis is the Christian liberty, right? Paul is 100%. Emphasizing Christian liberty. What is the difference between a person, how many evangelicals, when I was in school, Lauren Larson, he was one of the big, I think he was like the college dean of JSM or something, but I remember he said, he said a lot of people, they get down on Christians for drinking, they get down on Christians for doing drugs. He said, but you know what, sir? He said, your fork is out of control and nobody gets in your face about your overeating habits, and your pants don't fit anymore. Your clothes in your closet don't fit anymore because you, my friend, are struggling. Something has a hold of you.
That's right.
It isn't drugs. It isn't alcohol. It isn't pornography. But you, my friend, are becoming a glutton, and therefore what really is the difference between this and that? And that was a lot of wisdom that he gave me.
100%. It comes back to the idea of self-control, right? Are you able to control yourself? Can you control your fork? And it also comes down to the endorphins that are released. It feels good to eat 5 cupcakes sometimes, right? I love Butterfinger, right? And I get on a kick where I'm like, I would eat, if unchecked, I'd eat 5 king-size Butterfingers in a day. And then after the third one, I start getting a sugar high, because I'm eating way too much processed food. Yeah. And our challenge is, here's what really cuts to the heart of it, is that when you describe, abstinence and stay away from this, and Paul says it's not about asceticism, it's not about what you don't have, it's not about the worship of angels, it's not about getting twisted and caught up in these things that aren't what Christian doctrine is, because Christian doctrine is Christian liberty. He says holiness is not a learned behavior. And so many people with that rigid fundamentalism, they are like, how many of the words in the song can I memorize to keep the lyrics simple? Because if I keep the lyrics simple and everyone can sing along, then we're just going to have that John 3:16 megaphone, right? We're just going to be, but we're not really saying anything. We're having a form of godliness, but we're denying its power.
Yeah.
And so holiness is not a learned behavior. Jesus didn't say, learn how to be holy, for I am holy. He said, be holy, for I am holy. Be ye holy, for I am holy. Be like me, because I am holy. Well, what is holiness? Well, it tells us in the Philippian epistle, he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Before that verse, he says, as you have always obeyed, even more now in my absence. Obviously, they didn't obey. Nobody obeys. But he speaks this word of faith, as you have always obeyed. Even more so now that I'm gone. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Because you've never walked this way before. So just trust me and take a step.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. That's good. That's good. I wanted to say this. We've kind of talked about this, but people that have been brought out of addiction, people that have been brought out of alcoholism, cocaine use, meth use, heroin, etc. I agree with you on this. I'm convinced that smoking pot for individuals like myself and so many others that I know would be detrimental and catastrophic.
It's not good for me.
No, it isn't good for me either. No. And the great thing about serving Christ is Christ will take that desire away. Like, I don't want to smoke it.
Right.
I don't want to smoke it. Like, I was working, I remember I told you about the kid that got arrested, where we're out there and he had his pot pipe and he had his medical marijuana card, and like he had problems, man. Like he had PTSD or something, and it wasn't any of my business. I wasn't sitting there, you ought to not do that. And I wasn't doing anything like I would have done 10 years ago.
Right.
But thank God for the sanctified process, right? Thank God for wisdom. Thank God for understanding.
Yep.
Thank God for patience, because, if I was a new convert 2 years in, I would have made him feel small, and I would have been pharisaical with him, and I probably would have told on him,
Yep.
But Christ, when you follow Christ, you get to a place where, like you said, it isn't any of my business. And but he was pleasant, to be around, and like he had a card, and he had PTSD. He'd spent years in the penal system. He was a wonderful Native American young man, and he told me, he says, I can't even go into these stores here in the International District. He says, because I'm Indian, and everyone looks at me like I'm drunk, and everyone looks at me like I'm going to steal something, and everyone looks at me like I'm a scumbag. He says, I don't know what to do.
That's traumatic.
You can't blame that guy for sitting there getting stoned and everything like that, but he had his pipe out and his high grade pot. And he goes, here, you want a couple of hits? And I was like, no, thank you. And people will say, well, what kind? That's all that he knew. All he knew was to share what he had.
Yep.
With, that was a gesture of friendship for him.
Absolutely.
That was a gesture of, peace, or,
Yep.
I want to do something nice for you because for whatever reason I see something in you that
Yep.
hopefully I don't see in others, and this is my way of showing you hospitality. So
Yep.
like we as evangelicals, we have to kind of we have to learn how to lighten up on some of those things.
Absolutely.
I think we do, and I think that far too many of us we're far too judgmental, we're far too condemning, and like you said, to a certain degree, we don't know what's going on with them. We don't really have any idea why they're doing what they're doing, and so what are we, what are we to do?
Well, sometimes it's because we don't actually care.
it's probably a lot of times that
Yeah.
we don't actually
We don't care.
If we're honest with ourselves, that's my statement. As you know, you may be the only Bible that and that's why I would say, man, I sure hope not, because there, you know, I will admit there are times where like I think that we really don't care. We don't see the individual, we don't see the pain, we don't see the suffering, we don't see we just see the pot, and we just we revert back to that reefer madness. We revert back to that, to that horrible thing that is drugs, and we just stop there, and we stop seeing people made in the similitude of God.
Yep. One thing that I just want to add to like this statement about people in addiction, messing around with stuff. Christianity is about empowerment, right? Like the Bible itself is a key to chains. It's not a padlock to chains. And I look at the world a little bit funny. It's just how I was raised, I guess. So if I'm outside and it is cold, I don't say it's cold. I say it's not warm.
Yeah.
If I'm outside and it's hot, I don't say it's hot. I say it's not cool, right?
Yeah.
Like not cool at all, right? And so, Ethan says that once in a while, and so I get to hear what it sounds like coming out of a human being's mouth. He's like, man, it is not warm. And so abstinence to me kind of sounds different. Like, it's not that I don't smoke pot, or I don't smoke cigarettes, or I don't chew tobacco, or I don't drink alcohol. I actually smoke all the pot that I want to. I smoke all the cigarettes that I want to. I drink all the alcohol that I want to. I do all the meth that I want to. I just happen to not want to do any. Like, my desire to do them is zero, but like I don't feel like I can't.
Yeah.
Right?
That's because there's true freedom there. Freedom that only Christ can bring.
Yeah, and it's like it's not a self-denial thing, because God has moved me beyond that being a desire that I have. Now, have I struggled with that? Oh, mightily. But that period in my life where like all of that is historic is really refreshing to know that the choices that I make are made with that free moral agency to listen to God more than whatever my body wants, or whatever my body thinks, or what I've convinced myself is right, or what I've allowed myself to justify.
Yeah, I was working with a couple of individuals several years ago, and I remember that one of them was saying, talking about watching some kind of like a rated R movie or something like that, and one of the individuals was, careful little eyes, what you see, careful little ears, what you hear, and this individual was like, I understand that. She's like, but I just want to be free from that thought, free from that idea, even though I may not watch the rated R movie. I want to know that I'm free, that I have the potential to choose to go that way. I'm not going to go that way, but I want to have the freedom to say I don't want to go that way, but I know that I can, but I choose to go towards Christ.
Yep.
And I completely understood that. The other person didn't understand it. But that is the true liberty and the freedom. Like, we could get up from this table when this video is over. We could go out. We could do anything that we want to do.
No one can stop us.
But we choose to follow Him, right? That is the choice that we make.
That's exactly right. That is exactly how I feel about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm convinced that pot smoking for individuals like myself and you would be detrimental and catastrophic. I don't necessarily know or understand how cannabis use might affect someone without a background similar to my own.
I'm not them. I mean, it's everything.
I can't say, like, I can say what it would do to me. Mm-hmm. It would take me to a bad place, because I'm afraid of like losing my mind. Because like I came so close to like madness so many times that like I don't like euphoria. Like, I don't like really any medication unless I'm like in a lot of pain, because like I feel that I towed that line for years, and like I don't like being in that place.
Yep.
Now, smoking it would take me to that place, but I don't know what it would do for somebody who doesn't have that kind of a background.
I want to introduce something in there
Go
to
ahead.
kind of tie that together with that, because you're right. Like, none of us see the color blue the same.
Yeah.
None of us smell air the same.
Hear music.
None of us, sandwiches don't taste the same one to another. Like, some people like more pepper, some people like, garlic powder. Like, not everyone likes fish cooked a certain way. But when we get to the point where we say, well, if I had the money that person spends on cigarettes, I would buy Bibles. Well, we want that to sound like it's a holy thing. It is literally coveting what someone else has,
really
and what they have the freedom to do with, right?
Yeah.
If I had their money, I would blah, blah, blah. So, like, you don't know what motivates another person.
Yeah.
You don't know. You don't know why people are drawn to the things they're drawn to, or why they feel driven towards those things they cannot escape from.
Yeah, and we always have to remember the biblical principle too. Like the scriptures warn us, you better be careful how you judge people. You better be careful how you condemn people who are suffering, who are in bondage, because you know what? Lo and behold, you could turn around and find yourself back in that position again, right? And that shows us that we don't know ourselves as well as we think that we like to think that we know ourselves.
100%.
Right? Because like I didn't struggle with nicotine. I still don't struggle with nicotine, but it didn't bother me for like 15 years. I started kind of hanging around the construction sites. I started kind of hanging around, working with these guys in the city, these rough guys, I'd smell a cigarette here and there, and my mind would drift. And my mind, we are all like sheep prone to want, right? My mind would drift, and I would be like, I bet a cherry cigar would taste really good after a big meal.
Middleton's.
And I caught myself, wait a minute, no, you can't, you don't need to, and I would say, God, give me the strength, give me the grace that, that I need. And so we have to be careful with things like that. We got to be we got to be careful how you judge people, how you look at people, how you condemn people. And I've talked to pastors, and like they get kind of upset when somebody comes in their church and it smells like pot or it smells like alcohol, and they're like, we don't want people like that in here. We don't want people to smell like, like there was at one of the camp meetings that we went to years ago. There was a man and he was ministering. He says, when was the last time you smelled pot in your church? He said, because it's probably been too long since you smelled pot or alcohol in your church. Every once in a while you ought to smell it.
Too sterile.
Yeah. And that's what the church is for. All right, we've just got a couple more here. I wanted to ask you this: is consuming cannabis for the Christian, right? Is consuming cannabis considered a form of idolatry?
I mean,
can it be?
I think anything can be.
Yeah, so I agree with that.
I think the danger is that, addiction and addictive types, like my dad's statement to me, you before you went to jail, you were shoving, dope up your nose, and now you're shoving God down people's throats. I think the Bible can become an idol. I think the King James only translation can become an idol.
Yeah.
I think fundamentalism
Jimmy Swagger can become an idol.
I think your favorite preacher can become an idol.
TD.
Yeah, I think it's easy to say, well, exactly to line up with what you were just talking about, that, the way that you judge someone can be idolatrous, right? Like, you literally enter into the frame of mind where witchcraft seems normal to you when you are thinking, I want that person to do this. Like, Lord God, I am going to pray that this person, this liquor store owner, shuts their business down. It's not your business. It's not your business to pray that. Like, you can pray that you don't go there.
That's like that old woman. That's like that old woman, the one that would go around with the hammers and smash all the liquor bottles. And
Power
the
and
Puritans, right? They were those old ladies that and they were heralded as these. But to her credit, drunkenness was like a scourge, back
I mean,
in the early cities like
people
that.
people did terrible things to each other under the influence of all kinds of stuff. People have done terrible things to each other.
Yeah, but is
under
she
the
supposed to
influence
go
of
in and
spirituality.
damage that man's property and break
No.
what is it? People say two wrongs don't make a right.
That's right.
Right, because then you have people that are so-called evangelical. They go in and they blow up abortion clinics. They shoot doctors that perform abortions, and it's like, no, that isn't right either. Two wrongs don't make the right.
And never mind that people have freedom to make stupid decisions. No one stopped me when I was making stupid decisions.
Yeah, do sometimes I wonder, do evangelicals do they really want free will?
No, they don't
They
believe
need
in
to read
freedom.
Clockwork Orange. They need to read Dostoevsky. They need to read the Bible. They need to really look at some, Paul. Paul knew the poets. He knew the philosophers.
They have no
He
desire.
knew the culture.
They have no desire
Yeah.
for people to be free. They have their goal. Fundamentalism has this as its core tenet. Let's keep the verses simple and everyone can sing along. Don't think.
Yeah. Caters to like a sheep herd mentality. Yeah.
Yep, don't think.
Yeah, and there's nothing really that Christ can do for you in this life, but it's going to be that eternal golden ticket, almost similar to before Luther's dealing with the Reformation, the golden ticket that will get you to heaven.
Yep.
You're going to get everything way over here, way over yonder, and it's almost like a fairy tale, a fable.
It's just like getting
It
high
is a
on
fable.
weed and going on some sort of trip.
Yeah. So, an idol is anything that's more important than God.
Yep.
An idol is anything that absorbs your heart
Yep.
and your imagination more than
Yep.
God. Metaphorical examples of idols in modern times: self, security, approval, relationships, success, right? Wealth, health, food, intellect, and comfort.
Yep.
I like intellect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at Dostoevsky, right? Dostoevsky, he always shows the cold-hearted, cynic, intellectual, and then he always juxtaposes that individual with a person who is less educated,
Yep.
considered a simpleton,
Yep.
usually a prostitute, but yet that
Yep.
individual
Someone
is
with little or no means.
yeah, but yet that, and someone who's doomed, then
Yep.
probably will never escape the hell
Yep.
they are in.
Yep.
But they are capable of loving.
Yep.
They are capable of forgiving.
Yep.
And he teaches us that empathy and compassion always outweigh intellectualism.
Always.
The church could
Always.
really get a hold of that in
Yeah.
the day and the times that we live in.
Well, what's Paul's conversation with Felix? He says, "Much learning has made you mad." He says, "No, actually, I tell you that which I perceive now, I am in my right mind."
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The I can quote the Bible, yimmer yammer. That kind of person has, for their learning of a very narrow and focused worldview, they have gone mad,
Yeah.
utterly and completely
Yeah.
mad. I just was on a multi-day rafting trip, and I took with me a King James translation. It's because it was a nice, compact. I like leather Bibles. It was one that fit well. It's a study Bible. It's a good Bible. It's an old Bible, and I've had it for many years.
the Elizabethan style.
Not that, it's just King James, just the modern
Oh.
King James.
Oh yeah,
Modern King
New
James.
King.
No, the
Oh,
King
just
James.
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
but
uh-huh.
we don't read the King James in what you described, the
Hamlet.
Elizabethan
Yeah.
Elizabethan
Yeah.
English, but
Yeah.
where like F's are written like, or S's are written like F's, and the word son is spelled SONNE. Like that's an actual 1611. All these are modernized.
Yeah, asunder, anon, all those.
Still has all that. Yeah,
Yeah,
has
yeah.
all that, but the word son is spelled SON, not SONNE. So it's a regular King James, like what you'd expect to find, in someone's study. As I'm reading it, I stumbled across this section. It has a rather lengthy section of how the Bible came to be. And so it talks about the Geneva Bible and the Gutenberg Bible, which predate
Yeah.
the King James. And that, the command was given to use the existing texts and refer to them as accurately as possible. And then it goes on to say, it's talking about, expounding on the glories of the King James. And it says, the familiarity and the comfort of the language to many people, the King James translation is the Bible, and they use the definite article in all caps, like a noun that is known to the reader, that the Bible is King James, that King James is the Bible. There is no version other than King James, which is the Bible. That's idolatry.
Yeah, the Baptists most of the Baptists are very good at they hold that up as a...
Oh, you're reading a perverted translation. Okay, so this perverted translation has a footnote that says most of the earliest manuscripts do not contain this sentence. So you're going to tell me that this is saying they're taking a passage out of the Bible when they're saying this passage is not in the Bible.
And most people that hold to that opinion, they don't understand metaphors. They don't understand idioms. They don't understand creative language. They don't understand metaphorical language. They don't understand, I don't even know how they got a high school diploma.
They don't. They get a little bit of Holy Spirit, and suddenly they become theologians.
We need the Holy Spirit, but worship the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind.
Yeah.
Why the mind has just become, we become so dull, and we had this conversation. I was like, how come people don't read Dostoevsky? How come people don't want to read?
It's not the Bible.
Yeah, and you said it was because that's why we become so stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Because nobody reads anymore.
Nobody reads.
All right.
They just repeat.
Now, does smoking pot lead to spiritual apathy? If you're a Christian, can it lead to spiritual apathy?
I think it is going to differ from person to person. I think it comes back to that statement that I said earlier. When you're not using, you're thinking about using. I think that if whatever reverie you're in, you have to stop and go do something, even if it's stopping to go eat. I think that that can be looked at in that same sense. There are people who thrive on augmented spirituality, that they seem to hear from God better. I don't know that they do or don't.
I read some of those in Reddit and Quora. This person that's saved and smokes pot, and he says that it helps him to meditate, and it helps him to focus in on the words of worship songs, and he has these.
I don't have a medical degree.
Experience.
I don't have.
I don't know what's going on in his mind. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
could it be beneficial? I mean, Paul does tell Timothy. He says, "Have a little wine, for your stomach."
Yeah.
And people are going to say, "Well, they weren't talking about wine."
Yeah. Why do fundamentalists think that the disciples and Jesus were running around drinking Welch's grapefruit juice? There was fermentation.
Well, there was no refrigeration, right?
There was fermentation. Okay, now I have this. Smoking cannabis tends to lead to extreme laziness and procrastination, right?
Yeah.
It's safe to say that a large majority in the body of Christ have a difficult time adhering and engaging in the Christian disciplines, prayer, meditation, Bible study, etc., without ingesting or smoking a substance that will hinder them from seeking the face of God on a continuous basis.
I think that's
because
a reasonable statement.
If you're saved, God has been dealing with me about this, the holy hour. I like to try to pray an hour a day if I can. I like to make that time because I'd like to hope and think that I'm mature. This is a meat and vegetable issue right here, right? What we're talking about. But I like to think that okay, you've been a Christian for 20 years. You ought to be able to carve out time in your busy day and to pray for an hour a day. But if you're getting stoned and you're a Christian, I think it can hinder that because we all live busy lives. We all struggle, it seems, to find the time to engage in actively pursuing Christ. So why put something on the top of that that can make it worse?
Yeah.
But then again, it comes down to the question of a heart.
Yes.
The heart.
Some people's Christian nationalism is what they get high on.
Yeah, we talked about that. This is our ending question. How do we, as ambassadors of Christ, answer this statement? As it concerns, can a Christian smoke marijuana? Alcohol isn't condemned in Scripture, but drunkenness is. Eating is not condemned in Scripture, but gluttony is. Right? Sex is not condemned in Scripture as it concerns the institution of marriage, but lust and adultery are. Cannabis consumption is a gray area in Scripture, so why is it so easy to condemn?
Because of fear of the other. like there are our intolerance for someone who looks at the world differently from me. My intolerance is a bias, it is a prejudice, it is a bigotry that I possess. Human beings are incredibly biased, they're incredibly prejudiced, and they're incredibly bigoted.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much that like you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, or it's this thing or it's that thing. The only way that you get around prejudice and bias is to acknowledge that you have it. And so fear of the other is what is always going to lead people down that path. A classic example, and this is a dangerous statement, but I'm going to make it. There is no county clerk in the Bible. Nowhere. There is no court of divorce in the Old Testament. A woman who was divorced from a man, so that passage where Paul says that a woman is made an adulterer if she marries another man, it's because the man wouldn't give her a get. A get is the certificate of divorce, right? And so she's an adulteress because she wasn't given the right paperwork by the person in the house who could read. Because the person in the house who could read could send her off if she made him unhappy in any way. Like, you burnt my toast, so I'm going to send you off, right? You're illiterate and you can't fend for yourself, and, goodbye. And so we love to look at someone who does things differently and automatically condemn them because of our limited knowledge and cultural competency of the Bible. And so in the Old Testament, there is no county clerk. In the New Testament, there is no county clerk. There is the statement, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's. And so we look at someone who engages in premarital sex and we say, well, you guys are living in sin, right? And even though in the Old Testament, it was like, hey, I want to marry you, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want you to marry me, right? Even if I didn't want you to marry me, I'm getting married to you, right? But there's this betrothal, right? And so like there's this covenant promise, not a relationship of convenience. And so the county clerk is now getting the government's permission to get married. And so the same people that say we don't want the government in our life are saying, but you have to have the government in your life to get married. So they're saying render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's, but yet they themselves refuse to acknowledge that what God has done through an organization like government is what is now the way it is.
Right.
So we're quick to condemn because we don't like that the government does things differently than we think we ought to, but we don't live in a theocracy.
Right. As we close tonight, we've been. I appreciate you speaking with me.
Thanks for having
me.
us.
And we were trying to answer the question: can a Christian smoke pot or marijuana? And we didn't come to a definitive answer because there isn't a definitive answer.
There isn't, and there shouldn't be.
Yeah, you have to work out your own salvation. You have to seek God and if a wise man once said, by prayer the path will be made plain. Yep. And God will lead you the way that He would have you to go. So we can't give you just a solid yes or a solid no. We just can't give you that. That isn't what this was about. We're not telling people to go out and to get stoned. But these are things, the door in the state of New Mexico is wide open now. Like we have to talk about these things because they're not going anywhere. We've done our best. We've done it with love. We've done it through prayer, and we appreciate you watching and being with us tonight. God bless you, and thank you.